So thank you, Scott. Everybody can hear me okay? Yeah, so I mean, what Scott said, that's my whole talk. No, if you think about sort of emerging trends, right, in technology, and, where Scott and guys are, I think, is really on the forefront of it. There's people were talking about, oh, well, we got to get what everybody's doing on the coast, how do you get that stuff happening in the Midwest, and so on. But the idea, I think, at the core, and this is getting back to Scott and these guys, is whatever your company does, I don't know what you do, right? But maybe you make T-shirts, you make soda pop, you make parts for medical devices. And Chris talked about some of this in his part source talk. Is you don't want to waste your time and resources and energy and money on what I would call undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? I made a comment to this earlier on the panel I was on this morning. And that's kind of where this notion of cloud comes in, right? I'm not going to talk about cloud, but I just want to kind of put a shout out to that whatever your core business is, it's not IT. I mean, I guess you could be an IT company. Your company really does something else. So focus your energy on doing that and doing it well, and let cloud partners like Bluebridge and those guys do what they do best, right, and host that infrastructure for you. So I actually also was going to start with, I sort of creeped around the back of all these talks all day long. You probably thought I was a reporter, but with my blue jeans and everything. But I was actually taking notes, thinking about some of the things that everybody was saying today, and I wanted to try to make them relevant for what I was going to talk about. So number one, priority number one for everybody is innovation, right? How do you innovate, and what does that take? And, I heard some interesting things in terms of big data. I'm going to talk about innovating on big data. But the plenary session this morning, they talked about, we aren't where we need to be at all relative to big data. There's a lot of surveys out there, Gartner and the like, that say, 4% of companies say that they're good at data analysis, and they're getting what they need out of their data. 4%, right? So that's hardly anybody. But then some of the things that came out of some of the panels this morning I thought were interesting was, literally quote, Google tells you everything, right? Whatever I need to know, I'm going to go get it from Google, right? And then again, this notion of, how do I be more like these companies on the coast, whether it's Google that you have in mind, but these innovators, I think, is what that means. How do I be more like that, right? And then I did hear a comment which I completely reject, no offense to the person who said it, but, in my industry, big data is not a part of what we do. And it's not really a topic that we deal with. And I'm going to actually talk specifically about why I totally disagree with that. But some other things like Chris from PartSource said, which I think is actually fascinating that Chris said this. And it gets at how do we be more like Google? How do we be more like these innovators that are on the coasts of the country? And what is it that they do, right? And what Chris himself from PartSource said, and I've never met Chris before today, is we stopped being a parts company. Or we stopped being, so I'm going to have to read it now. We stopped being just a parts company and started acting like a technology company, right? So instead of thinking of themselves as they just do this and then there's technology to support that, in order to be innovative, they started thinking the way technology companies think. And I'm going to talk a lot more about how technology companies think and what that means, and how Chris can talk about how they brought that in at PartSource, but I'll talk about how other companies are bringing that into whatever it is that they do that isn't innately technology, and how that actually has an impact on every industry. So even if you're in real estate, no offense to the real estate lady who said that earlier today, but big data does matter, and technology does matter in your industry, if you haven't heard of Zillow, for example. And then I want to make one comment on what Tom just said around the security stuff. We have a big cybersecurity team in our data science group, because we see cybersecurity as a big data problem, right? There's all of this data about who's trying to get into your firewall, all the activity of people that work for your organization as they're moving around the network, things they're trying to log into, directories they're trying to access, and so forth. And that data exhaust comes off of all of that activity, right? So that in and of itself is a big data problem. So no matter what industry you're in, security, I'm sure, matters to you, right? Okay. So I work for a company called Pivotal. We're a software company in Palo Alto, California. Actually have offices all around the globe, Toronto, London, Singapore, New York, Denver, Chicago. But I want to first tell you a little bit about who I am. So, like I said, I'm the field director for data science for a company called Pivotal. That's what I do now. Prior to that, I spent about 5 years working for a company called SAS, big data analytics software company in Cary, North Carolina. Maybe you've heard of them. I was a senior product manager there. We were developing a series of products called high performance analytics. It's all about in-memory and parallelized computing for sort of in-depth statistical algorithms, right? And then before that, I worked for a company in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania that really did data analytics and application development, but largely based on mainframe, so that company is probably going to be no more. Which is the reason that I have this sort of technology layer on top of who I am and where I'm coming from, because it sort of parallels what we see going on in the industry, right? And I'm sure you guys are all technology leaders. Looking around the room, we're all about the same age, so we've seen this actually happen. Right? I don't need to tell you guys this because we've seen this happen, right? The first sort of generation platform that came along was the mainframe, right? And I don't need to tell you everything the mainframe did or didn't do well, but it was primarily there for automation of financial accounts, right? So then you had one of these things, and you had access to that, and you were able to do that stuff fast. So then some of that heavy lifting of running your business, you could focus on something else, right? And then in the 80s, 90s, right? This client-server era, web era started to emerge, led by companies like Microsoft and Intel. A guy named Paul Maritz was in charge of development at Microsoft in the 80s. He's our CEO, by the way. I'll get to that in a second. But, so then that started to become the automation of like everything else that you do. Communication and via email, right? Billing, customer understanding, and so on via CRM systems. And what we're seeing now is this move into this new era, right? It's sort of a new platform for computing, and that's where we see the cloud coming in, right? And that starts to open up this whole new discussion around new experiences for customers, new business models for enterprises like yours, right? How do I operate in a system like this? There's new needs around things like the Internet of Things, so I have constant bits of data generated by all kinds of machines, right? Again, the company I work for, we actually have General Electric as an investor in our company to the tune of about $100 million. And, I spent some time in Louisville, Kentucky, watching where they make my dishwasher. And those things have so many sensors on them and the ability to wirelessly communicate back to General Electric about the state of itself. And this is just a dishwasher, right? So it's everywhere, this notion that all of these machines are constantly producing data about themselves. And if General Electric wants to make better dishwashers, they better understand how it is that people are using these dishwashers. Not just what breaks so that I can fix it, but what are the behavior patterns of users, of customers of my technology, right? I was actually talking to Jane about the Museum of Art, right? They have this awesome new thing going on at the Art Museum, all of this technology stuff, and I can interact almost like in this real-time kind of way with the art exhibit and get all this data about what's happening there, right? And part of that is because they want to understand in real time, literally right now, what is it that people care about when they come to the museum? What are they interacting with? What's important to them so that how can I make an experience for a museum goer more interesting and more relevant for them, right? And the way that they do that is through software, right? So that's the idea of becoming a technology company, right? The Cleveland Museum of Art is becoming a technology company. They're thinking about themselves in the way that a technology company thinks about themselves. So don't tell me that your industry doesn't involve technology, doesn't involve big data, and doesn't involve software. No offense, Jane, but if the Cleveland Museum of Art is leading right edge on that, then everybody needs to be thinking about that, right? Okay, so, and while that's important, I guess especially to a software company like ours, is over the next 10 years, this is Gartner or somebody, there's going to be $1 trillion spent on this move to this new era of cloud computing, of big data, of agile software development, some of these kind of buzzwords, which you see in guys like Chris at PartSource, right? He's already doing this, right? Jane's already doing this at the Museum of Art, right? So medical parts manufacturer, you guys do make the parts, right, Chris? Or you just sell them? Medical parts company in Cleveland, Museum of Art in Cleveland, right, are leading this move to this third platform, right? Yes, Google and Yahoo and Facebook, they did too, but so are these local companies, right? that no offense, but you wouldn't necessarily associate with being a technology leader, a thought leader in the space. The Cleveland Museum of Art and Parts Source. I'm just going to pick on those two the rest of the time. So why is that happening? So Mark Andreessen is a very, 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 very influential venture capital guy in California. And he wrote an editorial in the Wall Street Journal a couple years ago, and it was entitled Why Software is Eating the World. And what that means is everything I just said, right? You think about what I was saying about Jane and the Museum of Art, right? Software is how you engage with your customers. And then all of us are customers probably of each other half the time, right? That's how we expect to engage with you, right? I go to the Museum of Art, I expect there to be software that's going to engage with me and create some experience for me. That's just how it works. Or I want to buy parts, I'm a biomedical engineer, and I'm in the operating room, and I need more parts for this machine that's breaking. What am I going to do? I'm going to grab my phone or my tablet and expect to order the parts. And sorry, Chris, but I expect them to show up the next day, too. Right? I don't know if you do that. But so that's the point, right? You don't all have to start being software companies, but you better think like one, or someone's going to eat your lunch, right? And the people that are going to eat your lunch are some of these people. And maybe you don't know these people, but I could put Zillow up there. So if you're in the real estate industry, Zillow's going to eat your lunch, right? But like Nest, the bottom thing in the middle there is a thermostat. If you haven't heard of Nest, they have this technology-based software. There's an app. You can control your house from all over the place and so on. And so Honeywell, who's a customer of ours, Nest is a little bit scary to Honeywell because they create this interesting software-based experience, and Honeywell makes thermostats, right? So that's a little bit scary. Okay, well, we need to start thinking more about software experiences because Nest, this nobody startup, is doing it too, right? Well, then Google acquires Nest. So suddenly, Google is their competitor, right? That's really scary. Or you think about Square. Square is actually my favorite, probably, although I use Uber. I travel all the time, so I probably use Uber at least once a week. If you don't know what Uber is, it's awesome. There's an app that I can order a car anywhere, right? If I get on my Uber app now, I can order a car. In 5 minutes, there'll be a guy in a Lincoln Town Car or whatever here to pick me up and take me wherever I want to go. But Square is actually cool because, Square is this app, again, software, that I use to process payments, right? So instead of having a Visa terminal and paying them 3% of my transaction fees and swiping credit cards and all the money goes back to Visa or whomever, I can download this app for free, get this little tiny device that sticks on the end of my phone or in my tablet to swipe a credit card, right? And then Square processes the transaction for me, right? And what I think is really cool about Square is this story that I heard on NPR where there are this small little chain of coffee shops in Seattle, I guess. And when you go in and you buy your coffee, they use Square. So the way the transaction works is, you're me, I'm ordering coffee, and I'm the barista, and I take your order. Then when I'm done, I just flip the little tablet over, you swipe your card, and then there's a little series of screens to finish the transaction if you use Square, you know what I'm talking about? And so the way it was written was as soon as I flipped the thing over and you're going to pay now, the first screen said, how much do you want to tip, right? And it said $1, $2, $3, or nothing, right? So first of all, you don't really ever tip the barista at Starbucks except maybe the 15 cents off the $2, from your change. But what they saw was people were tipping $2, $3, $4, whatever the screen told them to do, and then you went to the next screen and you signed and you were done, right? So that was great. Well, then Square, because they use agile software methodology, put out this new release of the software that was way better than the last one, but they inadvertently moved that tip screen to the end. So then the tips, plummeted 70% in the next week. People weren't getting tips anymore. It was just by accident. Square didn't mean to do that. So there was this revolt. Everyone was all mad at Square about what they had done. So then Square rewrote the software again and released a new rev 2 weeks later. So now you have this Square, who's a $3.5 billion valued company, right? They have tens of millions of users globally. And in the course of 3 weeks, they released 3 new versions of their software. And, by the way, their software is the only thing they do, right? So think about your sort of internal software development practices in your own company. It's highly unlikely that you released 3 new revs of software in 3 weeks, right? And the reason they do that is based on the way they go about it with data and technology and software development practices. And then one more thing on the notion that these things are only happening on the coasts, right? All these crazy people in California are pushing the bankers in New York to be innovative, right? Well, Monsanto, they might literally be in the exact center of the country, right? But Monsanto is another big customer of ours, and it's kind of back in this Internet of Things notion that all these machines that are involved in agribusiness, planting products, harvesting crops, right? Tons of sensors coming off of them, reading the weather, and so on. But one of the things that we looked at for them was, is there a way to understand the movement of commodities markets, right? Corn futures, right? That kind of stuff, based on social media and Twitter in particular, right? So now we can all chuckle. That just seems silly, right? People don't tweet about commodities prices, and that's not what it was about at all. Right? But there are hundreds of millions of conversations going on in places like Twitter that have to do with the conditions that affect commodities prices. Droughts, rain, strikes, closings of factories, you name it, right? All of these things together form this conversation about factors that impact the direction of commodities prices. So we did an analysis for them, and I'm not going to say that there's this 100% correlation. You just need Twitter, and you can become a billionaire by predicting commodities prices. But it was enough so that it was worthwhile to them to kind of bring in and operationalize inside their company. And actually, one more aside, Humana Insurance is in Louisville, Kentucky. We have this, I'm not going to talk about it today, but we have this big organization in our company that's focused on agile software development. They actually were some of the 4 founders of agile software methodology. And so we partner with companies and just build software together, right? So Humana loved it so much that they're actually opening an agile software development center in Louisville, Kentucky, so that they can build software the way that we do based on our methodology, right? So this is Louisville, Kentucky. I forget exactly where Monsanto is, but they're not in California, right? So these are where these things are happening, right? It's not just crazy people in California and hard-charging, nuts in New York. It's happening all over the place. I'll actually pause there if there's any questions you have so far. No? Okay, so I said I work for this company called Pivotal. We're a software company in California, really globally. We were spun out by EMC and VMware. Most of you guys probably know both EMC and VMware. Paul Moritz, who's our CEO, again, I said he came from Microsoft. He ran R&D there, was basically number 3 behind Steve Ballmer and Bill Gates at Microsoft. And so Paul Moritz and Joe Tucci, who runs EMC, were sort of looking over the landscape of technology and so on, and listening to the Mark Andreessens of the world about software is eating the world and so on. And a couple years ago, kind of formed this notion that, again, we need this new platform to address the needs of people like you as you move forward into this sort of next generation of technology. And we need to form a company to meet that. And it's really founded on sort of 3 core premises, right? Big data, which I'll talk mostly about, platform as a service, and the notion of agile software development, right? So we're kind of like a startup. We have, that's a 1,700, that's probably more like 2,000 people now, right? With this $100 million investment from GE, we're like a $1 billion business, right? So we're kind of a startup, but we get paid every 2 weeks, which is good, at least from my point of view. So, what we do is, I'm not trying to give you a Pivotal software pitch, but what we do is really focus on apps, data, and analytics, and then giving organizations, enterprises in particular, the ability to move around that circle really fast, because that's what we would argue that Google does, that Uber does, that Nest does, that Jane Alexander at the Carnegie Museum of Art does, right? You move through this cycle really, really fast, so you can be innovative, or the guys at PartSource, sorry. Because, there's this big shift that's happening, right? And if you don't see it coming and you don't pay attention to it, you're going to be Blockbuster, right? Blockbuster is gone. And they're mainly gone because of Netflix. I mean, it's not one-to-one, but it's about the model, right? Blockbuster, you'd go in and you'd rent videos, or you'd go online and you order videos, but you get a thing, right? Well, Netflix delivers a software-based experience And they use data and analytics to figure out what you like and recommend it to you. I mean, they even made a whole show, House of Cards. They wrote the show based on data and analytics before they even hired anybody to work on the show. They did all this analytics on what people like. And so oversimplified, people like Kevin Spacey, they like political intrigue, blah, 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 blah. You wind up with the show House of Cards. And then they go and get Kevin Spacey and the cast, and they actually write the show, and it's, lo and behold, a hit. Not because they got lucky. It was actually a hit because they used data and analytics to create the show in the first place, right? So now that's where we go for our content, right? To the point now where, we work with some of the big television networks. I mean, they're afraid of that. NBC can't do that. That's not how they make shows, right? They have agents, and they have creative people, and they have cool ideas, and they write shows, and then they stink, right? So they're afraid of that, right? And Netflix is worth, 100 times less than NBC, for example. But that's a real disruptor for somebody like NBC. So, you got to be on the lookout for those people in your industry. And so I've kind of touched on a lot of this already, but, what do these people do? And I would add Uber and Netflix and these other companies to the bottom of this where it says Amazon, Google, Yahoo, Facebook. Well, what is it that they do that's so special, right? Well, they store and reason over large amounts of data, and they do that quickly, right? So Amazon can recommend to you the stuff they already know you're going to want to buy, right? And they operate and automate at the scale of the cloud, right? And the cloud allows them to do that without having massive infrastructure costs, right? So again, that gets to the comment I made at the very beginning, right? That's why this cloud notion is coming into play. And, to the KPMG guy, yeah, security, governance, all that stuff totally matters, right? And you got to really think about that stuff. But that's how these people are able to do that. Although your cloud could be internal. It doesn't have to be an external cloud. It's just a matter of architecture style, right? And they have a way that they build software. I'm not going to talk about how we build software, but they have a way that they develop and deploy software in this sort of Square example, right? How did Square build software, 3 new revs in 3 or 4 weeks, whatever it was, and release that back out to their customers, right? That's really hard to do. And you got to be able to do that stuff at speed, right? That's what I was saying. So if you think about an enterprise like you guys, right? Well, how are we going to do that? It doesn't relate to me, does it? Or I've got other complicating factors on top of that. All right, so I need to operate and automate with the choice of cloud. I'm not going to go to the cloud to do that, but I want to do that, on virtualized infrastructure internally like VMware, right? Something like OpenStack or Amazon. What we see a lot of is, I've got this crazy idea, right? I'm Chris at PartSource. I got this crazy new thing I want to do. Well, then rather than spin up all the infrastructure internally and so on, why don't I buy some space on Amazon, build out a new project, prove that it works, and then I'll bring that internally and turn it into a production business, right? That's an example of what we see going on in enterprises. But it's also important that I be able to interoperate with my legacy systems. I'm not going to blow up everything we do just because Chris told me to, right? That's ridiculous. I mean, if you ask my kids, you should never listen to me. But, then this notion of the Internet of Things, right? And again, the Internet of Things sounds like this kind of far out there, crazy idea that doesn't affect everybody. But now that Jane's my new best friend, what she's doing at the Museum of Art is an example of that, right? They have hundreds or thousands or, the best art collection in the world, but it's all connected with this data about it to the user as they're interacting with it, right? That becomes this Internet of Things. So maybe it's not on the scale of, a jet engine and all the data that they produce, but it's the same idea, right? There's this Internet of Things at the museum, and as I walk through there, it's interacting with me in the way that I want it to, right? And particularly through software. All right, so focusing in on data. I said I was going to talk about data the most, right? So a big part of this gap is based on data, right? And there's this big data utility gap, I would argue. So it's not about, there's a guy with me this morning talking about Hadoop. And so there's technologies, of course, that are necessary for this. And there's all these V's that people tell you are relevant for big data. But to me, it's just about utility, right? Am I using the data that I've got in a way that is revenue generating for my company, right? So 70% of data is generated by customers. 80% of that might be being stored somewhere, but that doesn't mean that it's being used, right? And by used, I mean, is it being prepared for analysis, right? Are we doing machine learning and statistical algorithms against that to understand the behavior of our customers or how our products are used or whatever that might be? Well, only 0.5% of that data that's being prepared is actually being used for analysis. And then on top of that, some number significantly less than that is even being operationalized, right? So if you imagine all the data that you would have, if you could grab it all and keep it all forever, just this infinitesimal amount is actually being used in operational senses, right? And so, again, some of these innovators that are good at that and using their data, Facebook, Google, not surprisingly, I suppose, Uber, right? Uber is constantly delivering new services to their customers based on the data that they gather in their software, by the way, about how customers use their service. In fact, Uber has a new ice cream service, right? I can order ice cream in the summertime, brought to me by a guy in a big black car. But I mean, Zillow, if you think about Zillow, their entire business is really, Zillow's a real estate website. Their entire business is based on data about real estate, about transactions that are happening in the real estate market and so on. So it's all about using data. And these are some companies that I would label as smart enterprises that are doing the same thing. Southwest Airlines has this really great ticketing system. And it optimizes their route planning based on the tickets that people are buying or that they're predicting that people are going to buy, right? Okay, so again, the notion is what really matters is your ability to think about these three things, data, apps, and analytics, but then your ability to move around them and between them very, very quickly, right? Some of you are probably great. I mean, I hope you're all great at all three of these things, and you're just going to nod along the whole time I talk. But some of you might be really great at data. You might be really great at analytics or apps or some combination of them. But our point of view is that the words should all be on the slide, first of all. Our point of view is that the companies that are really innovative right now are really good at iterating through that cycle really, really fast, right? And so I'm going to give you an example of a company we worked with who we helped sort of get along that path and become a little more mature and successful in this journey to being a data-driven organization. So this is Kaiser Permanente, big healthcare system on the West Coast, actually kind of global or nationally, headquartered in California, though, right? And so this really represents a path and a journey that we took with them to sort of help them get up this adoption curve, right? So the first thing, we're a technology company, so this was completely selfish, but we wanted to prove to them that technology was a key component of their ability to discover new things, whether it's new things in genomic sequencing and next-generation medicine or patient care or predictive treatment of patients, triage as they come into the emergency room and so on, right? So they held this code-a-thon where they locked us in a hotel room for the weekend with, I forget, IBM and Cloudera and somebody else, and said, all right, well, use your technology and build us these solutions, and we'll see who's best, and then that's who wins. So we won. And by doing that, we proved that, it's not just having smart people that, can make you better and more successful, build better models or technology or whatever for your problem, but it's also about having the right technology to do that, right? There's a key component of tools that comes into that, and having the right data platform, for example, on which I need to build my models, right? Okay, so then, all right, I guess it makes sense that it's going to be faster, right? Technology just keeps getting faster all the time, so big shock. You prove to me that your technology is faster than the older one. That's great, right? All right, well, can you prove that using the right technology can actually make the model better? So much for faster, that's not a surprise, right? But can it be better, right? So we built this model for them that predicts the length of stay of a patient in their hospital system so that they can use that for staffing management, for being a little bit more optimized about how they stock supplies throughout the hospital and so on. And, we built this model for them that was, I forget how much more effective, but it was a lot more effective than the model that they were using before. So they've institutionalized this model from us to have a predictive understanding of when a patient comes into the hospital, what their length of stay is likely to be, right? So then they wanted to understand, okay, well, that's fine, but it's probably just this magical black box that you guys use, and I need to know that it's accessible to our people, right? And again, this is Kaiser Permanente clinicians and researchers I'm talking about, so these are smart people too, right? But can they use this technology to find their own kinds of answers, right? So we built this application with them for what it's called comorbidity feature generation, which means you come into the hospital and you're presenting with one set of symptoms, right? But those actually have a relationship, mathematically speaking, with a morbidity rate from some other seemingly unrelated health problem, right? And they want to be able to understand that, so when somebody comes into the emergency room, somebody comes to the doctor, they present themselves to the nurse, and they're being sort of triaged. If I can understand the likelihood of comorbidity for one thing based on the things that you're presenting me with today in this predictive sense, but also build into some software, so we built them an application that they could use. Right now, the nurses, right, those people that are triaging the patients on the front line are going to be able to be that much more effective. So that was great, and then they wanted to see, well, what about, those were our smart people too. What about other parts of the hospital, right? You got your data scientists, naturally you're going to be able to be faster, more effective, and so on. And then you worked with our clinicians and researchers. Those are smart people too. So I'm still not overly surprised that you've been successful. What if you go talk to accounts payable? No offense if you're in accounts payable. But can this kind of stuff help them, right? So we actually built them some models and an application for fraud detection in accounts payable. So this isn't just some magical, medical science application stuff that we're doing. It's just math. So the business problem is fraud. I want to understand better which cases, which bills, which whatevers are being presented to me that are most likely to be fraudulent. And I want to flag those and catch them ahead of time, because once you've paid a fraudulent bill, it's really, really hard to get that money back, right? Which is part of the problem that Humana Insurance is working on as well, right? So we worked with them and we built out this fraud detection model. And then, I didn't really say this, but I have like 50 people globally on this data science team, right? So this last one was just as important as us as it really was to them, which is, prove that once our team's trained, and not my team but theirs, that we can do this just as fast and as well as you guys can, right? Because they don't want us around all the time, and like I said, we only have 50 people, so I don't want to be around there all the time either, right? I want them to become successful, understand how we do this, and then go off and continue to do it on their own. So we built another model for them, and they were able to do it all by themselves in 4 days. So, it's not impossible, right? These are hard problems, but, it's this stepwise approach, right? Take on something small, and I think Chris talked about this when he was talking about how they're successful at it. Take on a small thing, become successful at it, get momentum, socialize it around the organization, show off a little bit, and then it gains its own momentum when people get really excited about what you're doing. So this is an application that we built for them. It's all around asthma management, right? And I'm not going to go into great detail, but we really built 3 sort of views of the same application. And this gets at some of what Chris talked about around personas, right? If you think about asthma, you could kind of boil it down to 3 personas. We have the asthma patient, right? We also have the asthma providers, the care providers, the doctors. But there's also the pharmacy, right? And they want to make sure they're stocked up on the right medicine based on the sort of conditions on the ground, if you will. So we built an application that was sort of building this patient risk profile based on weather data, based on pollution data, based on the particular patient's medical history data, combined with this robust set of other patients' history data, right? So we built this an application so that the user, the patient themselves, could have this mobile app that basically was giving them sort of a score to say, hey, look, today's not going to be the best day to go out and play golf, right? It's pretty hazy in the valley today. It's going to be hot. The pollution's up, right? Pollen, whatever it is, and based on your medical history, we know how this is going to turn out. So your sort of score for, a bad asthma day is pretty high today. So, maybe take it easy on what you're doing today, right? But, we also built this other view for the pharmacist, right? That there are this number of people in the general area of your CVS, of your drug mart, or whatever you are, right, that are likely to have these problems today. Asthma-related problems are going to need a new puffer, right? Or diabetics, you name it, right? Just imagine this for anything. So that the pharmacy can use that to be a little more efficient in how they stock the shelves in the pharmacy, right? And all of it really is meant to help our customers kind of move through this journey of becoming a data-driven enterprise. So thinking of yourself as a data-driven decision maker, right? What are the things that I need to decide about every day, right? Whether, it's Chris, and how do we stock the parts that we need to stock? Well, we've got data about when people need to order them, and we have that in a relatively real-time fashion, so let's be smart about that. Or Jane and I were talking about earlier, like, you could actually take what she does and plan the collection at the museum, because you know now, based on data, the things that people go to, the pieces of art that they seem to respond to positively, and the ones that they don't, right? So you could use that to curate your collection, right? So use data to drive that decision. So then imagine the things that you decide about all the time, every day, and think of ways that you can use data to do that, right? We're actually helping one of the networks today, one of the big 3 TV networks, and when they build shows, and think about like a news talk show, like a panel, right? And what they really care about is not so much that people tune in, obviously they care about that, but that's sort of decided already. I've already watched enough commercials, I've already been promoted enough. It's time for the show, I'm going to tune in or not, right? There's not a whole lot you can do 5 minutes before the show to get more people to tune in. However, what you can do, maybe, is control that people tune out, right? I don't want people leaving the show. But what if I could take all of the data about the show, the actual transcript? So I'm going to push back on your comment about a notes field, by the way. I'm going to use the actual text, the things that they were saying when they were talking on the show, over the whole history of the show for 8 years or whatever it is. And then I'm going to use ratings data, and I'm going to understand, well, what is it that people talk about that maybe turns people off and causes them to tune out of the show? And are there patterns that I can see emerging from that data, which is why I would keep that notes field? Are there patterns that I can see emerging in that data to help me understand the behavior of viewers of my show? And if so, what I can actually do is build a broadcast building application, if you will, so that we talk about the things that people want to hear us talk about, or in the way that they want, right? And we're still going to want to talk about current events that, that are going on. We can't always talk about Kim Kardashian, right? But we need to talk about current events, but maybe we need to have the right mix of the panel, right? Or maybe we need to change hosts of the show. Maybe people just don't like that guy. I don't know, right? But it's using the data that you have about whatever it is that you do to inform the decisions that you have to make about that, about your business, right? And so for us, it's a fairly simple process. I mean, each step of the way is extremely complicated. Just in the data lake notion of, I just want to bring together all my data, right? That's simple, right? Doing it isn't simple, but the idea is pretty simple, right? And technologies that are out there in the marketplace today allow you to literally keep everything forever, all of your data forever, keep it all. The economics are really there that you can do that, right? Now, how do you do that is complicated. How do you choose which partners to partner with along that path? Those are hard decisions. Right? I'm not saying it's easy to do that, but the first step is to think about doing that. Just get all your data together and get it in the same place, right? And then you got to think about, what I was saying about Kaiser and some of these other examples that I gave, like building big data applications. So using all that data that you got, right? Bringing it together to understand, how my customers are responding to the things that we're doing in the marketplace. What do they think about? What are they saying about us, right? What do customers who are about to cancel their credit card say when they're on the phone before they do that? Or how do they traverse our website when they're about to pull their money out of their 401k, right? These are things that we worked on with customers. So how do I understand those behaviors so that I can build applications based on that data to head off those things, right? When I see somebody taking the path on our website that's going to result in them pulling their money out of their 401k, what can I do to stop them, right? Our CEO, Paul, likes to talk about catching your customer in the act, of making a decision, right? Whatever decisions they make in your industry, I want to catch them in the act of that, right? Jane catches them in the act of liking art, right? And they're good at that because it's important, right? Well, then on top of that, not only do I want to build these big data applications and start using analytics to understand those behaviors, there actually might be entire sort of lines of business tangential to what it seems like I do that I could drive off of data and off of applications, right? I could build whole new lines of business based on my understanding of data or my ability to build software, right? So I kind of talked to this already. This is just sort of a process by which I go through to do that. I'm going to skip that one. So this is an example. This is actually looking at the TV show example that I gave, right? So I have the transcript itself. That's what's on the bottom there. You purposely can't read that. And then I have this distribution of topics. So these are the things that people are talking about. But the topics that are there aren't based on what the writers or producers of the show told me the topic of the show was. It's based on Chris analyzing the text field so that I understand what was actually being talked about. Sorry, I keep picking on you. Looking at the transcript itself and picking out using something called topic modeling, which is a text analytics sort of practice, so that I can understand the things that are being talked about, right? What are the terms, the phrases, the phraseologies that are prevalent throughout this broadcast? So what is it that people are actually talking about, right? And then I can look at, well, this dependent variable, that, you know, what do the ratings drops look like, right? Every time somebody says, I don't know what, you know, the ratings drop. There's an impact. We're seeing viewers leave the show. Every time Chris Stevens gets on the panel and starts talking about big data, people leave the show, right? So we can't have that anymore, right? But then, you know, you look at, well, who's on the panel? Who are these people? What do I know about these people, right? And we actually build in the application, actually do sort of a web scrape so I can get metadata information about whomever it might be on the panel, right? So there's a lot of data out there, internal and external. The key is to bring them all together, but then deliver them in a fashion, you know, that a customer is used to working with, right? So a show producer wants an application, right, that they can interact with all of this data in. They don't want to go in and write code, right? They leave that to us. They want an application that they're interacting with their data. So on the notion of sort of operating with legacy, this is a telco company, and you know they have a lot of, this is actually even thinking about what the guy from KPMG was talking about. There's a lot of regulations. You know, they need to report on, you know, how people are using the network, how many drop calls they had, all these kinds of things about the telco network itself. And you know, they were spending, I forget, some inordinate amount of time preparing data to prepare reports, to report to the regulators how their business was or wasn't doing, right? So what they're actually trying to do as a business is provide telecommunication services to, this is in Asia, like hundreds of millions of customers. What they spend most of their time doing is preparing data to prepare a report to go to a regulator, right? Undifferentiated heavy lifting. That's what they're doing all their time, spending all their time doing. That's a waste, right? So building out a system, big data analytics and reporting, they were able to then shrink the time for the reporting down. I don't know if we report on the metric there, but you know, in the end, they're not wasting their time doing that. They still have to perform that function, but they don't need to spend all of their time doing that. They can go back to figuring out how to provide better service for their customers, right? So I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to skip some. Oh, I'm going to go back to that one. Just real quick on this. The notion here is that, you know, if I want to understand how my customers behave, what things they like to buy, what do they spend money on, how do they behave when they're on my website, what do they say when they call into the call center, those are probably in different data sources today, right? Silos of data that are spread all over the place. So this gets back to the notion of a data lake, right? At a minimum, let's just combine them together in one spot so that I can sick people on them who understand, you know, like I said, what Google and others do in terms of driving value, right? Reasoning over vast amounts of data, right? By the way, on the call center thing, you know when you call in and you get the automated system and it says press 1 to go there, if you want such and such, press 3, right? So there's a company that, as you would imagine, that builds that software. What you don't know is that your voice is being recorded when you're on that thing. So every time you're yelling at it to just give you effing number 2, you're actually being recorded when you're on that thing. So, as a note, okay. So, what do I want to get to last? Yeah, right. So, okay, I'm trying to go fast here. So again, back to this notion of moving through data analytics and applications really fast. Really, the key theme is, you want to give yourself the ability to store everything. And I literally mean everything, right? So Doug Neal, who was on this panel with me this morning, will talk your ear off forever about Hadoop. Hadoop does give you the ability and the economics to actually store everything. So it's something you really ought to be considering, because you can literally store everything forever, right? And then you want to have the ability to analyze that stuff, but analyze anything, whether it's all the data that you've piled up in there, or you're bringing in data from third-party sources, or you're looking at, like I said, voice data, web logs, all this kind of stuff. I want to be able to analyze anything. And then from that, my customers, again, expect to interact with me through software. So you got to start thinking of yourself as a software company, as a technology company, so that I can build the right thing. I want to build that application that is the way that customers want to interact with me, right? So now my favorite example is Jane in the art museum. That's how people want to interact. Yeah, we all want to go to the art museum because we feel guilty and we're supposed to be smarter and understand art a little bit better. That's not actually what we want. What we want is what they delivered. I want to go there and be dazzled by some cool technology. I want to walk up to a piece of art that I don't know anything about and then look on my tablet and it'll tell me everything I might want to know about that thing, right? And then if I like it, I can go to another piece of art and it says, oh, well, I know that you liked that other thing. Did you know, by the way, that this guy was influenced by this other guy that you liked before, and this new artist you're looking at, she was influenced by the other two that you happen to like? I mean, that's what we want, right? That's what Amazon does. They give me a recommendation. I go and I buy stuff, and they tell me, well, I know you. I know what you like. Well, go buy this thing, right? That's what they're doing. I know what art you like. You should go see this other thing. It's right down your alley. You'll love it, right? Okay, so then, I'm going to skip this last one. Okay, so then this is another customer of ours. They process transactions. Their whole business is processing of financial transactions, and it's not Square. Companies are 1,000 times bigger than that, right? But back to the security example that the guy from KPMG was talking about. Data security, on a very serious note, is a big data problem. I said that kind of at the beginning of some of the notes that I've taken. But what they're able to do here is we created this thing for them that we called a digital fingerprint, which is, again, back to what he was saying, we've had this notion of I'm going to dig a big trench around my data center and no one's going to get in, right? And now I'm secure. And of course, that doesn't work. So instead of trying to find better ways to keep stopping people from getting in, people are going to get in, right? But once they're in, it's understanding the nature of their behavior once they're in so that I can recognize that and stop it next time. So for this company here, we built this digital fingerprint which basically looks at everybody who works there and their sort of extremely broad, normal behavior patterns. What servers do they access? What data do they pull from? What systems do they operate on? What and so on. So that we can build this comprehensive understanding of that person. Again, back to these data silos. It's not finance and IT and marketing. It's IT and IT and IT and IT. But it's, looking at, intrusion detection, looking at, what sites you're visiting. And by creating this fingerprint of all of the users, because what happens is when somebody gets into your firewall, then they start pretending they're you, right? So then they use your user ID to creep around the network and start accessing information that they're not supposed to, right? And so for them, we were able to build this comprehensive system where we sort of have an anomaly detection system based on every person, 30,000 people, whatever, that work there, so that when something pops up, you have this predictive way to understand which ones, first of all, are likely to be problems, and then you have a path by which you can go down to sort of diagnose what happened and hopefully stop it before it becomes a real problem. And then the last thing, so this is not the World Series, but it's an even bigger and better sporting event. This is my ham-handed segue to Mark Shapiro. We did some work with one of the sports networks, and actually we work with three of the MLB and three of the biggest sports leagues in the country. This is actually a really interesting project we did using iBeacons. I don't have a stake in iBeacons, but I wish I did. So, there's iBeacons that were placed all around the city. And when people were coming in for this event, the league that's putting on the event wants to understand, well, what do people do when they come here? Or you could imagine this is Jacobs Field, right? What do people do when they show up for an Indians game? What do they actually do, right? Where do they all go? What are they saying when they get there? Are they tweeting stuff about how the lines suck at the hot dog stand or whatever? And so for this, we didn't put the iBeacons in, but we gathered all of the data off of these iBeacons. People were opting in on their phones, so then we gathered all of that data off of them and their phones for what they were doing and saying and interacting. So then they could create this customized experience, right, for all of the people that are attending this event. So I go and I say that the Steelers are my favorite team, and these are the things that I care about. So as I'm walking around, they know that I'm going to go look at the Lombardi trophies, but there's a big line, and they know that. So in real time, they can tell me, look, Chris, 6 trophies is enough. You don't need to go see the trophies again. Sorry. Why don't you go experience something else for once, right? Sorry, that was a cheap shot. I said I'm from Medina County, but I am a Steelers fan. But anyway, so the point is that for the sports league, we took all of this data in real time, helped them create a custom experience for each one of the visitors. There are millions of people visiting this event, right? And imagine you're doing that at the U.S. Open. You're doing it at an Indians game, right? Or you're doing it at the art museum, right? As people are walking around the museum, you can see how it is that they're interacting and what it is that they're doing, and you can influence the way that they're behaving or, like I said earlier, catch them in the act of making a decision. So I'm probably out of time, so do I have time for questions? One question. Anybody have one question? Yes?
So you're talking about collecting data, right?
Yep.
And if it's, if your data is in a structured format, it's probably a lot easier.
Doesn't matter.
How do you go, like, for example, website.
Yep. I never said it was NBC, by the way. Yep. I mean, yeah, so, no, that's totally legitimate, right? If I make it sound like magic, it's because it is, right? No, so there was an article in the New York Times, and it was talking about data science, and, the ugly truth is that we spend most of our time gathering data, finding data, cleansing data, arguing with, compliance people about whether we can use the data or not, right? So there's a lot of that. Yeah, that goes into it, for sure. And I don't mean to minimize that at all. But your question about structured and not, the nice part about the technology, and for us, Hadoop is underlying this whole thing, is that it actually doesn't matter, right? I mean, in the end, Hadoop's a file system. I paused, obviously, on purpose on the word file. It's a file system. A transcript from a TV show is in a file. The things that I yell at the customer service agent when I'm on the phone is in a file, right? My transaction history at the bank is in a file. So those things can all be put into a file, right? Right. I might be. Yeah, no, you're right. I might be, actually. I mean, we could get into a whole architecture about sometimes I might be, sometimes I might not be. But you're right. I mean, you might be sometimes, for sure. But it's about purposefully architecting whether I'm replicating it or not, because I have it in there because it's into a pipeline of some value that I'm going to generate, right? I'm gathering all the data about how people walk around the art museum, because that's ultimately generating more interest in the museum, and we're having more memberships. Our campaigns are through the roof in terms of fundraising. The attendance is off the charts, right? And that's why I'm doing it, right? But in reality, just the storing part, now we're talking about the utility of it. The storing part really is, the economics really are that you might as well just keep it. Put it all in there and keep it, and then figure out afterwards what you're going to do with it. Right? It's sort of like this schema on demand notion. Just put it all in there and then think about it later, right? Because it's practically free to keep it in there. It really is. Now, the using it is not practically free at all, and that's a great point.